Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's continuation of the What's Next series covers the Washington Wizards, who had a lot of the progress that they made over the past 2 seasons come crumbling down this season. Going back to the 2013-14 season, the Wizards were on a streak of 5 straight 40-win campaigns, though they didn't go over the 50-win mark in any of those. But this season, things went a lot differently. And now things are incredibly complicated for a team that this time 2 seasons ago was a game away from reaching the Eastern Conference Finals. Whether it is their payroll, a lack of future assets, limited young talent, and a ton of question marks up and down the roster and throughout the organization, there's a ton to go through for this team. So let's go ahead and get started, beginning by talking about a few building blocks that they have on the roster. And honestly, this isn't going to take very long. They have Bradley Beal, who's 25, has 2 years left on his contract, has played in all 82 games in back-to-back seasons, finished top 10 in the league in points per game while shooting better from the field than he did last season, and posted a higher number of assists. He was simply amazing for the Wizards and has shown that he doesn't need John Wall to create for him anymore, and that he might actually be a hindrance to him when he returns from injury. All this makes Beal both a great player to build around, but also an extremely valuable trade piece, as I'll talk about a bit later. And beyond that, the building blocks are hard to come by for this team. There is still John Wall, who just 2 seasons ago, when the Wizards hit their peak, was an All-NBA selection, but now has played in just 73 games combined over the last 2 seasons, turns 29 in September, is currently recovering from a torn Achilles, and will begin a new contract next season that pays him between $37 and $46 million a year for the next 4 seasons. The official word on him at the moment is that he doesn't know when or if he'll return in the 2019-20 season, and considering that, his past injury issues, and his contract, I honestly just put him in this section so people wouldn't yell at me in the comment section for not mentioning him at all. The bottom line is, I can't possibly imagine a more untradeable player than John Wall right now. Like, he is the exact definition of untradeable. And if the Wizards were somehow gifted the opportunity to just get him and his salary off the roster without getting any value at all in return, they'd do it in a heartbeat. So he's much more of a cinder block holding this team down than he is a building block. And honestly, I'm not really impressed by anyone else on this roster. Really quickly, I'm just going to jump in here. This is me during the editing process of this video getting upset at myself for not recording properly in this section because I didn't talk about Bobby Portis at all. He's obviously a player that the Wizards should look to keep in restricted free agency this summer. He played well for them in the limited games that he played, shot well from 3, and should at the very least be a good 6-man front court type player for them moving forward, so long as the contract that they sign him to this offseason is of good value. If the value creeps up too high and they have to pay too much, obviously they would consider letting him walk, but I don't know why I didn't mention him. I should have. I apologize. If you want to talk yourself into last year's pick Troy Brown, or the 25 games that Jabari Parker played for Washington, or restricted free agent Thomas Satoransky, or retread big man Thomas Bryant as possible glimmers of hope, that's fine, but I'm not going to do that personally. They each have some intriguing aspects of their games and their performance this season, but realistically, this team is just reaching for any kind of young-ish talent that they can get their hands on, which is a good strategy, but I'm not impressed. The only guy that I could really see becoming something is Bryant, who posted solid numbers in 72 games and is still just 21 years old, but given the fact that this is the first year of real production that he's shown in the NBA, and that he did so on a roster so devoid of front court talent, makes me want to see more from him in the future before I get excited about him at all. Okay, with that covered, let's move on to the draft. And thankfully for Wizards fans, they actually have their own pick this year. A long-running strategy by the now former front office, led by Ernie Grunfeld, was to trade away future firsts for immediate help. And before last year, when they selected Troy Brown, they hadn't picked a player in the first round since 2015. And thank goodness they held on to this one, because they desperately need some young talent, and they should be able to find some of that with the 9th overall pick. And really, there isn't much point in trying to identify a specific position that they should target in the draft, because as I already established, outside of Beal, they basically need everything, and they should definitely be going with a best player available approach in the draft. There isn't much of a possibility for trading up because they don't really have any significant assets to do so, so they'll just have to stay where they are and hope their favorite prospects drop to them. Moving on now, let's look at the Wizards' situation in free agency. And as of right now, they're on pace to be at exactly the salary cap of $109 million this summer, but that is spread out between just 6 players: Beal, Parker, Wall, Ian Mahinmi, Dwight Howard, and Brown, which is a really sad state for their payroll to be in, that is the 6-man group that they're paying over $100 million to. The positives, however, are that Parker's money is a team option that they'll turn down to open up $20 million in space this summer, and the combined $20 million of Mahinmi and Howard's contracts expire in 2020, which should, in theory, give them some flexibility moving forward. But again, the big issue here is John Wall's contract. Now, I don't want to sound too pessimistic here, but let's just look at the facts with Wall in terms of his value to an NBA team. He's less than a year and a half away from turning 30, with a game based on athleticism that isn't likely to age very well. He's coming off of a torn Achilles, which is a difficult enough injury to come back from even without considering his age, and even when healthy, he hasn't been all that great the last 2 seasons. So the likely event here, in my opinion, is that when John Wall does return from injury, whatever that is, he'll be a shell of his former self and will struggle to be an above-average starting point guard in the NBA, but will still be a player being paid between $37 and $46 million a year for the next 4 seasons. And that whole situation is something that they're just going to have to live with. They can't trade him. No team is going to take this colossal mess of a contract off their hands, and their options beyond that are limited. Technically, they could use the stretch provision on his contract as outlined by Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer, but that would just result in them working with a salary cap that is $18 million lower per year than every other team across the league all the way until at least 2025. So the options here are to keep Wall, pay him his huge contract for the next 4 seasons, and hope they get some kind of value out of him on the court and be done with him after that, or stretch his contract for less of a burden on their payroll before a longer period of time. This is an awful situation to be in, and honestly, if it were me, I would probably just eat the money over the 4 years and get it over with, and hope that he is at least still a somewhat good player over that time span. Now, some of you might think I'm being too harsh, and if you want to be a bit more optimistic about his return from injury, then that's fine. But when you consider all the factors that I've already outlined, I would caution against any kind of optimism until further notice. Moving on from the Wall situation now, let's just assume from now on that they aren't going to stretch his contract. With that settled, they have a few options. After they decline Parker's option, they'll have around $15 to $16 million in salary cap space after accounting for the salary of the 9th overall pick in the draft, and they could certainly use that space to try and go after some young talent on the free agency market. They would likely have to target restricted free agents such as Terry Rozier and Malcolm Brogdon to get the kind of youth that they're looking for, but it would still be an option worth taking a look at. Beyond that, they could save their space for the 2020 offseason when they'll have about $30 million in cap space, assuming they don't take on any long-term money this summer. That would give them even more flexibility to try and build a competent team around Beal and whatever is left of John Wall, along with this year's draft pick, and with all that, they might begin to build something relatively promising. However, there is a third option. It isn't unrealistic to think that the front office sees this entire situation, the lack of talent, the inflated payroll, the Wall situation, as something in need of a complete reset, and that would likely involve trading Bradley Beal. Even as good as he was this season, and as much as I'm sure they'd like to keep him in a more ideal situation, he is also an incredibly valuable trade asset. There will be more than a few teams that will be chasing stars this summer after free agency, and the Wizards should be able to get a good amount of value in return for Beal. A young player and a draft pick or two would be a nice foundation, along with a 9th pick this year, to try and build something moving forward while they wait out the Wall contract. It wouldn't be the easiest of rebuilds, but they have to at least consider completely starting over by trading Beal. In the end for the Wizards, there's really no need to sugarcoat it. They're in a bad spot right now. Unless something crazy happens, they have basically one hope for building a competitive team over the next few years, and that hope is Bradley Beal. If they can make the right draft pick and free agency decisions, they might be able to build a playoff team in a year or two around Beal and whatever is left of John Wall, or they could just choose to use him as a way to start a new era of Wizards basketball by trading him away for future assets. But either way, This won't be easy, and I know the feeling as a Nets fan. A few years ago, things looked pretty hopeless. No picks, no talent, no cap space, and it took a while, but things did finally turn around this season, but that is far from the norm in this kind of situation. In all likelihood, things are going to get a lot worse before they get better for this team and this fan base, and when you consider their situation as a whole, they might actually be the most hopeless franchise in the entire NBA right now. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.